Hello, and welcome to the Skillful podcast, where we explore DBT and RODBT skills to help you reduce emotional suffering, improve your relationships, and become more present in your life. I'm your host, Marielle Berg, a psychotherapist at the Bay Area DBT and Couples Counseling Center. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of the Skillful podcast. Today we thought we'd get the new season and the new year started by talking about a DBT skill called accumulating positive emotions in the long term. Ed and I talked about covering this skill for the first episode of the new year, sort of as an alternative way of thinking about New Year's resolutions. Because for so many people, you'll make your New Year's resolution, and by the second week of February, you've already broken them all. And it can lead to such a sense of disappointment and discouragement. So we wanted to offer a different perspective.
And I think that the idea of New Year's resolutions and using the new year to create momentum and motivation to make changes has a lot of value to it. And I think it can be exciting to think about undertaking something new in order to make changes that you've been wanting to change. And in true DBT fashion, at the same time, New Year's resolutions don't tend to pan out for most people.
Yes. And there's probably a whole host of reasons for that, which we won't dive into too much, but you'll see as we go on and we talk about this skill, it's a pretty involved process. And to make any major change in our lives, it can feel overwhelming. So there's a way that it really needs to be given some time and energy and thought and broken down into small, manageable steps.
The traditional New Year's resolution can be so ineffective because it's based on this faulty premise that I'm going to make this big, major change. And it's a new year, a new me, and I'm going to do it all right now. And the reality is that most effective behavior change is an accumulation of small changes. Breaking big goals down into small, reasonable parts and taking them one at a time.
Yeah, it's incremental and it takes patience.
Which is, like saying, oh, it's a new year, I'm just going to do everything different. That sounds wonderful. But, patience is actually what is more needed, both patience and perseverance.
Yes. And just because it's a new year doesn't mean that you aren't still you. So for better or for worse, we are still exactly who we were in the old year with the same strengths and challenges and all of that.
Right. So I think that in the emotion regulation skill set for DBT, there are several skills that are meant to help us decrease our emotional vulnerability and increase our emotional resilience. And accumulating positive emotions is one of those skills that can be helpful in increasing our overall emotional resilience. And when we talk about accumulating positive emotions, we talk about short-term and long-term ways of accumulating positive emotions.
Yes, in Season 1, Episode 17, we covered accumulating positive emotions in the short term, which was really all about why doing daily nice things for yourself matters in terms of building emotional resiliency. And so this is sort of a second part of building or accumulating positive emotions, which is really about the long term. And the reason why we do this is if you are not living a life according to your values or not living your life mostly in a way that really fits with who you are, you're going to be more prone to some of the more negative and painful emotions.
And I think that we want to, in order to live that life worth living that we talk about a lot in DBT, we want to be thinking about what are my long-term goals? What are the things in my life that will keep me in line with what's important to me, with what my values are? And really looking at what are the things I want, the important values to me, my long-term goals for myself, and then breaking that down is a much more successful, potentially, and reasonable way to create that life that we want for ourselves.
Yes. And if anyone who's listening might be feeling overwhelmed at this point, hang on. We're going to really break this down, because I know even conversations around like, are you living a life according to your values, can just shut people down because it can feel like way too much. And it can be like, heck no, I'm not. And everything is wrong. And I don't know how to start changing things.
Or like, I don't have long-term goals. I can't think about that. Or I don't have any values. I don't even know what my values are. So what I appreciate about this, step-by-step process of accumulating positive emotions for the long term is you don't have to have any of that figured out. The process itself will help us kind of identify a few things that might be helpful and some concrete small steps so that it's very doable and manageable and small, instead of, oh my God, am I living according to my values?
Right. Which just feels, way too huge. So let's begin to talk about some different categories of values or priorities that will help people think about what's most important to them. And when we're talking about values and priorities, and we're going to list a whole bunch of them and discuss some of them, a couple of things are important to keep in mind. When you're assessing, like, is this actually important to me? Is this a value that I hold? You want to be checking in with your wise mind. And you also want to be thinking about what's actually important to me versus what might be important to the family that I was raised in. Maybe you were raised in a family where particular things were super important, but as you've grown up and left that family, you're reassessing and thinking, you know what, this isn't really a value for me. You can also be thinking about values that might exist in your particular culture or ethnic or racial group that may or may not fit for you. And the reason why we emphasize this is that we really want to help folks build lives that are aligned with what is most important to them and not to others.
And I think one of the barriers to that can be the idea that I should have certain values, whether that comes from family or culture or peer group or whatever it might be. Like, there are certain values that I should have. And I think that as we look at what's important to us, there's just so many options that there's lots and lots of room to choose. What do I want to focus on that's important to me, regardless of what anybody else might think about it?
Yes. And that this takes courage to live like that if it's something that's a bit countercultural or people around you may not necessarily understand or approve of. You might need to use other skills to help with
Right.
that. But this is really about checking in with what's important for you. And as we begin to embark on this list of values and priorities, you may already be thinking, or at least some people might be thinking, already know what's important to me. It's X, Y, Z, these things are important to me. But I think it bears revisiting from time to time because our values and priorities can shift as our life changes. So as we go through different seasons of our life, for example, what's really important to you in your early 20s can look really different in your early 50s and so on.
Exactly. In thinking about ways to examine what might be values that are important to us, for us, we find it really helpful to use the DBT skills training handouts and worksheets workbook, which is what we use in our skills group, which is by Marsha Linehan. In the second edition, on pages 253 to 255, is a long list of different potential values and priorities. And when we go over this skill in group, we have people go through the entire list and check off which ones kind of stand out, and then go through the process of narrowing that down to what do I want to focus on first? What do I want to focus on now? Because there's usually way more possibilities than anything that we could handle in one day or month or year. So looking at that long list, there are some categories of values that I think it's helpful to think about to see, is this something that's important to me that I may want to focus on? So the first one on the list is attending to relationships and having a value and a priority of either working on current relationships or reaching out for newer relationships, or even ending destructive relationships. But attending to our relationships can be a really important value that we might focus on.
And this one, I would venture to say, is important to everyone. We're social beings. We all need relationships. Some people are more extroverted versus introverted. So if this isn't one that you resonate with, some things to think about with attending to relationships is that it's not necessarily quantity, but it's really about quality. And to also think more broadly, because sometimes when we talk about relationships, folks might solely focus on intimate relationships, and relationships of all kinds are really important. So maybe broadening the lens and thinking about all the different kind of relationships you have and attending to them, which means repairing old relationships if they need to be repaired, reaching out and forming new relationships if that feels important, working on current relationships and making sure that they're doing okay, and potentially ending relationships that feel destructive or harmful in some way.
And one of the things that in this category of attending to relationships, we can also possibly put on that list attending to our relationship with ourselves and putting a priority on that of, what is my relationship with myself? Do I, attend to myself in a way that I would want a friend or a loved one to be with me? Am I maybe a little too harsh and demanding of myself? So that can also be a relationship that we might take into consideration in terms of all of the relationships in our lives.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I mean, really, that being our first relationship, the relationship we will have for the rest of our lives. How is that doing? Because that can really set the stage for how you relate to others. If you're critical and demanding of yourself, that's going to come out in your relationship with other people.
So, attending to relationships can be a really important value to take a look at. Another important value can be being part of a group. So, not just one on one relationships, but being a part of a group with other people, finding a sense of belonging to something, receiving affection and love from a group, like a family, for instance, or a group of friends, a spiritual community, any other type of community that we might be involved in. Attending to our relationships as part of a group can be an important value to take a look at.
Yeah, and I think attending to relationships and being part of a group are values that almost everyone shares and that we all kind of need. As I said earlier, we're social animals. We need each other, even if we are introverts, which I self-identify as. A sense of belonging is so important. I think, we all need to feel like we kind of have our tribe or our people, or there's some place where you can go where other folks get us. And so those two, attending to relationships and being part of a group, are more of the relational values. And then a third value to think about is being powerful and being able to influence others, which for some folks is really important and for others not so much. But some things to think about if power is important to you is being respected by others, being a leader in some kind of capacity, having success in various ways. It also can involve making a lot of money. And so there, as we're talking about this, people might have judgments or think like, I don't want that, or that's bad. But this is, a value that some folks hold, and we need some folks to hold this. Otherwise, no one would run for president.
For some people, being a leader is important. Going for leadership positions. Sometimes people will say, like, I really want a promotion at work. I want to be a supervisor or a leader in my workplace. I want to take on leadership within a group that I'm involved in. I do think that looking at it is power, is being able to influence others important to me. And am I going for that when it's feeling like that's something that I want?
Yeah. So another value related to being powerful and being able to influence others is achieving things in life. So this is a value that's about being productive, about valuing hard work, working towards goals. It might be about ambition. And I think, again, similar to the relational values of attending to relationships and being part of a group, achievement in one way or another is important to most people. And it can look really different. So what being ambitious or productive or working hard looks like for one person might be very different for another person. For one person, it might be climbing a corporate ladder. For someone else, it might be taking in rescue animals. It can look really different, but this is related also to a skill that we talk about in DBT called build mastery, which can really help with our sense of competence and self-confidence.
Another category of value to think about is living a life of pleasure and satisfaction. Which again, what comes up for a lot of people is like, oh, no, no, I'm not supposed to value pleasure. And the reality is like that it can be important to have a priority on valuing seeking fun in our lives, having free time, enjoying aspects of our lives, including work or our hobbies. So, focusing on the value of seeking pleasure can be really important, especially if we feel like we don't do that enough.
And I know I shared when we talked about accumulating positive emotions in the short term, how much I struggle with that. And I think even when we talk about having this as a value, like an overarching value for your life, it feels a little bit edgy for me. Even though part of me knows, like, yes, folks can actually absolutely prioritize a life of pleasure and satisfaction, but I think I have some internalized kind of taboos around that.
And so if that is the case for others, it is something to think about. And maybe it's a value that you want to put more emphasis on to counteract the shoulds about not seeking pleasure or having fun in life.
Right? Not making that a priority.
Mm-hmm.
And so another one, which I think also kind of can correlate to having a life of pleasure and satisfaction, is having a life that is full of a lot of excitement, having unique kind of relationships and things happen in your life. So for some people, they really value novelty and excitement. So trying new and different things in life, being daring and seeking out adventures is super important. And this might be someone who really likes to travel to unusual places or try like risky kind of or an out of the box kind of sports and activities.
And so thinking about, is that something that's important to me that I want more to have these kinds of adventures in my life? On the other hand, sometimes the idea of behaving respectfully can be an important value for people. So really putting a priority on promoting a sense of humility and modesty within ourselves, kind of following traditions, following the rules, treating others well as a sense of being respectful. And again, with all of these values, each of them has its place in our lives. Where we might want to focus on them is if we feel like it's an underutilized value. So I've definitely known people who have felt like, you know what, I am not conscientious about how I treat others. I am needing to put some more emphasis on that. So being respectful of others, kind of being more humble might be a value that we would want to focus a little bit more attention on.
And then another value to think about is self-direction. So for some folks, it's super important that they kind of chart their own course in life. So they follow their own path, that they're innovative, that they're creative, that they feel like they have the kind of authority to choose what they want to do when they want to do it. I think about this value around self-direction to be really a value around freedom and independence. And so for some people, this is super, super important.
And another value might be spirituality, and looking at ways that spirituality is incorporated within our lives, whether that's practicing a specific religion or a specific spiritual tradition, or maybe exploring spirituality a little bit more, growing in our own understanding of ourselves and our place in the world, our sense of purpose, practice of prayer or meditation, those kinds of things. So spirituality might be an important value for some people to take a look at.
Another value is security. So this is living in, safe and secure surroundings, taking good care of your physical health, having steady income that meets all your needs. So for some folks, security is a really important value. And I think about how some of these values can really feel like they're in contradiction with other values. And I worked with a couple once where one of them, their primary value was around security. And the other one's primary value was around having a life full of exciting events and unique kind of adventures. And so you could see where they would get stuck. But some of us have these competing values, within us. We both want security and we also want the exciting life. So just things to note and be aware of. as we go through this list and ask you to reflect on what's most important to you.
And recognizing that, again, all of these have their place in our lives. Which one we want to focus on? Recognizing that we can have these sense of competing values in a way.
And another value to think about is recognizing the universal good of all things. So this might come out in caring for nature, being an environmental activist, understanding different people, being really open-minded. You might be involved in community organizing, being fair and treating people equally. So there's lots of ways that this value can be expressed, but this is the overarching value would be around, I think, recognizing the universal good of all things and the connections we have, the ways we're interconnected to all other beings.
And as we only have a few more values to go through, a related value is contributing to a larger community. So prioritizing contribution to others, maybe helping people in need in some way, contributing to our friends or family members, being committed to some sort of cause or a group with a purpose beyond ourselves. Feeling like we're making contributions to the broader community beyond ourselves can be an important value.
I think this value, the one of contributing to the larger community, can really help some people with a sense of meaning and can also help with a sense of belonging when we're helping others or part of a group endeavor to make things better in some way. And then we just have a couple more we want to go through. So another value might be working at self-development. So maybe developing your own kind of personal philosophy of life in terms of how you want to live and doing challenging things that help you grow and mature as a person.
And then the last value that we would want to cover is the value of integrity. So really focusing on our own sense of personal integrity, being honest and responsible, being courageous as we pursue our life, and making sure that we are, paying our debts to others and contributing, especially if we've caused any sort of harm, we're contributing to making that better. But really focusing on this internal sense of integrity can be an important value to focus on.
So we've just listed a whole bunch of different values and priorities. There may be things that we didn't list that are actually really important to you. So this list can really be endless. These are broad categories that we wanted listeners to turn their attention towards as they begin thinking about, okay, what is most important to me? What do I value in my life? And how can I begin incorporating more of that value into my daily life?
And hopefully going through this list sparked some ideas for you of things that are important to you. Maybe it's not one of the ones on this list, but one of these brought something out for you of like, oh yeah, this is something that is really important. And I don't know that I have that as prominent in my life as I would want.
Yes. And I mean, with all of the skills, but particularly with this one, it's not a one and done. Like this is sort of regular lifelong work, revisiting, rechecking in with your values, making sure that they're showing up in your life in one way or another. So this isn't kind of a quicker skill. It's not the tip skill where we have people dunk their heads in ice water and they feel better. This is much more, as we said in the beginning of this episode, kind of plotting, incremental skill that takes a lot of patience.
So in order to accumulate positive emotions in the long term, we want to be conscientious of our values. And there is kind of a step-by-step process to break this down to make it actionable.
Yes. So once you've identified what your important values are, the first step is to avoid avoiding. So if you've already listened to us at this point in the podcast, you're hanging in there, you're thinking about what your values might be. But I imagined as we were talking about it that some people might turn off listening or might turn off the episode because it can be like totally overwhelming. Like, oh my God, my life has to align with my values and it totally doesn't. I don't know what to do. And it's just, I could see some people just shutting down.
Or even like, oh, let's get back to the really specific actionable things that will make my life better now. I don't want to think about this longer term stuff. So if that is how you've been approaching this, that happens. And I do think in thinking about our values and our life's goals in a way, really focusing on that at times putting a priority on pursuing important values to avoid avoiding the bigger picture. So, taking some time to really look at this is the first step in accumulating positive emotions over the long term.
Yes, and once you've done that, the next step is identifying the values that are important to you. We just listed a whole bunch, and other ones might come up for you. So, getting kind of clear on what are your values, not the values, again, that you've necessarily been told you should have, or not the values you had when at a different stage in your life, but what are your values now? And then identifying one value to work on now. Like, what's most important? Because you may have gone through that list or listened along and thought, okay, like 20 things they said are important to me. But really thinking about, like, where do I have some charge, or where's there a spark in me around a particular value, around a particular area of my life that I really feel like needs some attention now.
And then once you've identified one value to focus on, the next step is to identify a few goals related to this value, the specific goals that you would need to work on in order to make this value part of your life. So, for example, if you go through all that long list of potential values that are important, identify a handful that you would want to focus on and choose one. If the one that you choose, for instance, is to be productive, that you want to put more emphasis on being productive in your life, then goals that you might set for yourself to bring this value more into your life would be getting a new job that you feel useful in, or being more active in keeping up with important tasks at home, or finding a volunteer position where I can use skills and build skills. So that would be an example. If your value is being productive, some goals might be specific things that you would need to do to have productivity be more a part of your life.
And this is another place, in addition to the avoiding that we talked about in the beginning, where I think people can get really stuck. And the reason why values work is so hard is because we often don't go from values to goals. We just think, okay, I value creativity in my life, but I am a lawyer and there's no creativity whatsoever, but I secretly want to be a painter and I can't do that. I will have to upend my whole life. Like, it can't happen. You throw your hands up and you say, it's too bad. I've made my bed. I have to lie in it. And so we want to gently counter that with this skill and have you, as you just did a moment ago in terms of productivity, Ed, have you really think about a few manageable goals that are related to that value. So you gave an example about productivity. I want to give an example about bringing creativity in. So maybe a goal would be finding a painting class to go to, or setting up an area in your house where all your painting supplies are. So when you're ready to spend some time making art, everything is set up for you. Or maybe you don't even have supplies and the goal is to, like, buy some materials.
Right. Or even, for instance, if creativity is the value and painting is what you would like to do, you may include a goal of listening to more music to get inspiration, or go on some trips to look at some scenery to get inspiration for painting more. So there's specific goals that would get you towards this greater value of creativity.
Right. So it's really, it could be really broad, going to museums,
Right.
reading books, or watching documentaries about famous painters, whatever it might be that's going to spark
Right.
this creativity that's important to you. And then the next step, once you get several goals related to the value, is to choose one, to just pick one of those goals to work on.
So, for instance, if your value is creativity, you've got a list of goals. The one goal might be to create a space for painting in your home. And so that's, out of the laundry list of goals that would be related to that value, pick one that's actionable. So, and then the next step after that is to identify action steps towards that singular goal.
So as we're going through this, we're like, it's getting smaller and smaller. And this is where, again, those kind of New Year's resolutions often fail because they're so broad. Like, I'm going to be a better person. It's like, okay, and how are you going to do that?
Right,
So
right.
we're making it really bite size. So identifying a small action step towards your goal. If the goal is setting up, that area in your house where you can do your art. Maybe the small action step is to talk to the folks you work with about clearing out a corner or clearing out a room. Maybe a small action step is searching for a desk if that's needed, or some materials that you need.
Gathering art materials into one place. So getting them from all the different parts that you have them stored and maybe buying some new ones would be another goal. So you're gathering your materials. There's many action steps towards that one goal. So we've gone from a long list of possible values to focusing on one value, creating a bunch of goals to focusing on one goal, creating a bunch of small action steps towards that goal. And then the final step is to take one action step now.
Yeah. And then repeat this sort of over and over in terms of taking more action steps, refining your goals, revisiting them. So it's a process, but it's so once you can break it down this way, these big values that might feel distant or unmanageable or just completely out of reach begin to feel more like they can be a reality. Oh, yes, I can have creativity in my life. I have this one action step. I'm going to carve out this corner of my home as my place where all my, art supplies are.
And again, I think that the process of, and I think it is helpful to write it down, to write down your goals, write down your action steps, and then you systematically go through those action steps. And once you have those accomplished, then you go back to your goals and choose a new goal and create action steps for that goal and go through those one at a time. And this is where New Year's resolutions tend to break down is, oh, I'm going to exercise, but there's no sense of action steps and doing them one at a time. And so that it's like, oh, I'm going to exercise more, which is so broad and vague and unclear to like, okay, I'm going to make a list of steps that I need to take, and then I'm going to take them one at a time. And slowly but surely, it's not as big and flashy, but slowly but surely, we do achieve those goals and build those values in our lives.
Yes, and the exercise is a great example when we were talking earlier about doing things that are actually important to you. So maybe exercise is more, it's important or you feel like it should be important, but maybe it isn't really important to you. Maybe you hate exercising and you've told yourself, you know what, I need to be a runner. And so really beginning to think about, okay, if I don't like exercising, but being physically well or contributing to my physical health is a value for me. What can I do that actually will work for me? Maybe that's taking a walk. Maybe that's spending time in nature. Maybe that's dance. So getting really clear on what is actually important to you, not what other people are telling you should do.
And I think in all of these things, having goals and action steps that are reasonable. So if you're not going to do it, it's probably not a good goal to focus on. And being able to use your wise mind to be realistic of like, this isn't really motivating me right now. What I appreciate about this skill of accumulating positive emotions long term is there's so many options of values we might pursue and goals around these values. Do the ones that you actually will follow through on and break it down into small actionable steps and just do those.
Okay, that's a great note to end on. Thank you. Thanks for listening to today's episode. To learn more, or if you're in the Bay Area and want to get started with therapy, you can find us online at bayarea.dbtcc.com. That's bayarea.dbtcc.com.